The recording has started. So when you're ready, Jean,
all right. In 1989, I began working at the Office of Archaeological Studies, starting with the analysis of ceramics recovered during investigations by the La Plata Highway Project in the lower part of the La Plata River Valley under the direction of Chuck Hannaford and Warkie Toll. These investigations resulted in the recovery of an extremely large amount of pottery, mostly associated with the Jackson Lake and Barker Arroyo communities in the south part of the valley that mostly dated from the Pueblo II to the late Pueblo III periods, with some evidence of earlier Basket Maker III and Pueblo I occupations. It became evident that to best document and understand the nature of trends reflected at these sites, additional data regarding the overall sequence of settlement along the entire La Plata Valley would be very beneficial. One source of such information was indicated in an overview of the archaeology of the La Plata Valley by Dyckman and Langefield that included journal entries by Deric Nusbaum on file at the Laboratory of Anthropology relating to his little-known survey of sites across the valley conducted in 1935. Deric Nusbaum was the stepson of Jesse Nusbaum, who was the first superintendent of Mesa Verde National Park, as well as director of the Laboratory of Anthropology in Santa Fe. Deric was in his early 20s when he did this survey, having already authored two boys' books at the age of 12 and 14 about his adventures in the then very isolated Mesa Verde National Park, as well as about his travels with his family involving encounters with the people and archaeology of the Southwest. After the La Plata survey, he continued archaeological investigations across the Southwest at the Gila Center in southern Arizona, mostly recovering tree ring samples from widely scattered sites, and conducted investigations, including those at Mesa Verde National Park that were published under the name Deric O'Brien. The La Plata survey was undertaken to provide additional data about the distribution of sites across the La Plata Valley to supplement Earl Morris's extensive excavation of 23 ruins on the New Mexico and Colorado sites of the La Plata Valley conducted from 1915 to 1930. These investigations were sponsored by the Carnegie Institution, with the resulting data greatly influencing the characterization of many of the phases of what was called then the Anasazi, defined for the Pecos classification system in 1927. The results of Morris La Plata studies were published in a 1939 report titled Archaeological Studies of the La Plata District. This report included descriptions and interpretations of excavated sites spanning the long sequence of occupation of the Colorado Plateau by ancestral Pueblo groups from the Basket Maker to the late Pueblo III periods. The survey covered much of the 70 miles of the south-flowing La Plata River and was mostly but not completely confined to sites along an area within 1.5 kilometers of this river from its confluence with the San Juan River near Farmington at about 5,500 feet in elevation, gradually increasing to the north with the New Mexico-Colorado border at about 6,000 feet and to the intersection with Cherry Creek near Red Mesa at about 6,700 feet. The survey sometimes extended westward into the upper stretches of various drainages, including Barker Arroyo, and resulted in the recording of 992 sites. given the lack of precise maps at the time um, of the survey. The exact location of many of these sites is still unknown, and specific time of occupation of many of these sites could also often not be determined. Information from this survey was never written into a report, although documents that included diary entries and site forms with accompanying notes and simple sketch maps, most of which depicted distinct structures, along with a later map showing projected location of sites recorded during the survey, are stored excuse me, at the Laboratory of Anthropology. While the collection of pottery was noted on almost all these forms, associated ceramics were usually not described or reported. Further investigations, however, soon indicated that small samples of sherds collected during this original survey had in fact made their way into several different institutions where they are still stored. The first group of ceramic collections we located were in the Mera collections at the Laboratory of Anthropology in Santa Fe. Samples from a subset of La Plata sites are stored in the drawers of the Mera collection and range from about 20 to 150 shirts, accompanied with slips with observations. It is not surprising that Murrah would have incorporated ceramic collections from at least some of Deric's La Plata survey into his extensive collections, given his investigations focusing on the creation of a pottery database from sites across New Mexico. As is the case for collections made from other areas, Mera noted the location of these sites, assigning them to Laboratory of Anthropology numbers to which they are still referred. Another set of shard collections from the La Plata survey sites were originally housed at the Gila Research Center and now at the Arizona State Museum at the University of Arizona. The Gila Pueblo Center was established in 1928 by the Gladwins to conduct archaeological investigations across the Southwest, some of which were implemented by Deric. One technique used to examine spatial and temporal trends involved gluing sherds collected from sites recorded during different projections on boards, where these were with similar ceramics were stacked together to define phases. These sherd boards were later discarded due to limited storage space, after which sherds from each board were placed into small containers, with those from various projects stored in larger boxes. Thus, I was able to examine small sherd collections originally made into Gladwin sherd boards from almost every La Plata survey site, and most, although not all cases, assigned these to distinct temporal phases. Sherds from the La Plata survey are also stored in the Shepherd collections at the University of Colorado Museum in Boulder. This collection was not examined during our study, although the detailed examination of 3,000 sherds from 95 sites in this collection provided the basis for Shepard's pioneering technological study of La Plata pottery included in Morris's 1939 La Plata report. Given that at the time, the pottery recovered during the Morris's original excavation of the Plata Valley was not available for study, having already been moved to the Carnegie Institution. Extensive investigations by Morris, and more recently during the La Plata Highway Project, as well as other surveys and excavations, provided critical insights about the nature and timing of occupations of the La Plata Valley and surrounding areas by ancestral Pueblo groups. Much of my current understanding of the long and complex history of communities in this area is influenced by my involvement in the analysis of about 250,000 sherds in the Jackson Lake and Morris 39 communities along the southern La Plata. Despite the shortcomings and lack of reporting from Deric's 1935 survey, what data that may still be claimed from this survey may provide important clues and insights about the occupation of an area where many of the sites are no longer accessible or have long been heavily impacted or destroyed. Combinations of types identified during the analysis of pottery, both from the Mara and Gladwin collections, provided the basis for our assignment of many of these sites to a single or combination of dating periods. The 8 ceramic-based dating periods noted included 6 phases defined for the Northern San Juan or Mesa Verde region and 2 for the Upper San Juan region. The assignment of ceramic-based phases to collections from each site provided an opportunity to examine settlement trends spanning a continuous 900-year occupation. Dating spans discussed here may slightly change in future studies as they simply reflect our current best guess. The sherds illustrated in the subsequent discussions reflect examples from different La Plata survey sites collected by Deric, although the vessels illustrated are from other collections, some of which represent examples from the La Plata Valley and other from sites in surrounding areas. The earliest ceramic-based dating periods noted was characterized as transitional basket maker and identified at 4 sites, all located in the southern end of the La Plata Valley. This period corresponds with the San Brito phase as defined for the Upper San Juan region and dates from about 400 to 575. These assemblages are identified by the exclusive presence of San Brito utility, which is defined as an early polished and self-tempered utility ware, sometimes described as brownware. Assemblages assigned to this period represent extremely rare examples of a still poorly understood component in the northern San Juan region that seems to be associated with an early planeware horizon, which underlies the early ceramic sequences for all Southwest cultural traditions. The next period recognized is the Basket Maker 3 period, or La Plata phase, spanning from about 575 to 725, and was identified as assemblages from 97 sites scattered across the La Plata Valley. This represents the earliest ceramic occupation commonly occurring in most areas of the northern San Juan region. Basket Maker 3 pottery types defined for this region display the characteristic like those noticed across the Colorado Plateau, with local ceramic types distinguished from those defined for other regions based on the presence of crushed igneous rock temper. Ceramic assemblages dating to this period are dominated by plain gray utility ware assigned to Chapin gray. Most of the white wares were assigned to Chapin black and white and exhibit decorations in mineral paint over an unpolished surface and sometimes with fugitive red slip over the unpainted exteriors. Designs are very sparsely executed, usually over unpolished interiors of bowls. These designs often consist of isolated geometric and sometimes repeating segments that include zigzag and fringed lines and triangles, as well as stylized anthropomorphic designs, together recommend reflecting styles that appear to have derived from basket maker period basketry and rock art. The early Pueblo 1 or Rosa phase dates from about 8725 to 825. and was identified at 122 sites, mostly located in the northern part of the valley. This period is usually not included with phases defined for the Northern San Juan region, and assemblages dating to this period are sometimes lumped into the Basket Maker 3 period. During this study, a distinct erosive phase, as usually defined by pottery from sites in the Upper San Juan region to the east, was utilized to recognize a distinct occupation associated with early and sometimes very large Puebloan communities. San Juan redwares and neck-banded graywares are usually absent, but can occur in extremely low frequencies in assemblages dating to later spans of this period. Assemblages are overwhelmingly dominated by plain grayware sherds. Designs and surfaces on whitewares resemble those noted for Chapin black and white, but were assigned to a erosive variety based on somewhat distinct decorations in organic or lead glazed pigment over usually a slightly polished or waxy surface. Designs are simple, consisting of straight, spiral, enclosed, or circular lines that may be open, fringed, or filled with other elements, including dots, short lines, or connected triangles. The late Pueblo I period, or Piedra phase, was assigned to assemblages from 40 sites and appears to date from AD 825 to 910. Ceramic assemblages associated with this period are dominated by plain neck-banded or coil gray utility ware types. Buff, black, and red, commonly assumed to have derived from areas of the San Juan region to the west, are also often present. Painted styles noted in whitewares are executed in mineral paint, often over well-polished surfaces, resulting in the classification of the great majority of whitewares from sites dating to this period to Piedra black and white, and could partly reflect a wave of influence from areas in the San Juan region to the west. Designs are sometimes arranged as units composed of a series of several thin, parallel, intersecting straight and zigzag lines, covering a portion of the vessel's surface. These lines are frequently embellished with combinations of triangles, flagged or fringed triangles, and ticked lines. The assemblages assigned to the early Pueblo II period, or Ackman phase, date from about AD 925 and 1025, and were identified at 71 sites, and reflect the beginning of a long trend where sites are concentrated in communities along the La Plata south of the Colorado border. Gray wares are represented by a gradual changing mixture of plain neck-banded, neck coil, and exuberant corrugated forms, with the frequencies of corrugated gray wares gradually increasing through time. White wares are characterized by forms with intricate, well-executed designs in mineral paint, characteristic of the Red Mesa style, as reflected in the locally produced Cortez black and white, with similar pottery styles associated with contemporaneous sites in regions spread across much of the contemporaneous ancestral Pueblo world. Surfaces may be covered with a crackled white slip, often with intricate designs executed in mineral paint. The designs are often organized in quartered sections that may include combinations of scrolls, squiggle hatchet ribbons, parallel lines, and ticked and stepped triangles. Assemblages assigned to the late Pueblo II period, or Mencos phase, appear to date between AD 1050 and 1125 and were identified at 235 sites, many of which reflect large organized communities that appear to be contemporaneous with well-known communities associated with the height of the Chacoan system. Gray wares are dominated by corrugated forms, mainly derived from jars, with relatively straight necks. Manca's black and white exhibits a wide range of surface treatments and is usually polished and slipped and decorated with mineral pigment, although low but significant frequencies of pottery exhibiting styles and characteristics indicative of this type are decorated with organic paint, particularly in assemblages that appear to be associated with the later spans of this period. Designs are often executed in solid and natural motifs that are bold and cover much of the vessel surface that include checkered squares and triangles, connect, connected and scalloped triangles and stepped triangles, bold and parallel meandering wide lines, and hatchet and cross-hatchet ribbons, characteristics of designs noted at contemporaneous sites scattered throughout the Colorado Plateau. Assemblages assigned to the early Pueblo III period or Macalmo phase reflect an occupation between AD 1125 and 1180 and were identified at 94 sites. Gray wares are dominated by corrugated forms, mainly derived from jars with intermediate rim eversion. Decorations are executed in organic paint. Rims tend to be flattened and associated with simple tick dots. Macamo black and white decorations are usually organized in simple, sparsely filled, and often simply painted band designs. Designs include banded rectangular lines, bands filled with straight hatchet, triangles, step triangles, dots, diamonds, and ticked lines. Framing lines are usually absent, except when incorporated into the rest of the design and when present are represented by a single line. Assemblages assigned to the late Pueblo III period or Mesa Verde phase date from about 1180 to 1300 or 1280 and were identified at 161 sites. Corrugated forms are commonly derived from jars with highly everted rims. Red wares represented by trade wares such as St. John's, black on red, and polychrome are present in low frequencies. Almost all the white wares assigned to Mesa Verde black and white, which commonly exhibit well executed and intricate designs in organic paint over highly polished and slipped surfaces. Rims are flat and commonly display a range of tick and line decorations. Designs include examples with banded and all over layouts that cover much of the interior bowl surface. Banded designs are commonly framed by single, thick, and multi-sized lines. Designs are often composed of combination of elements that include straight hatchet, triangles, step triangles, dots, diamonds, and tick lines. Exterior designs on bowls are common in later examples, both as isolated elements and as simple bands. Given the lack of accurate maps of this region at the time of Deric's survey, the precise location of many sites recorded could not be determined. The relative location of sites along the La Plata River going from north to south by mileage marker that was noted on each site survey form filled out by Deric does, however, provide for basic locational information. Thus, during the La Plata Highway Project, Chuck Hannaford was able to create a schematic map illustrating the number of sites assigned to our ceramic-based dating periods by mile marker, shown here from left to right for sites assigned to the Basket Maker, Pueblo 1, Pueblo 2, and Pueblo III periods. Major shifts in settlement patterns across the La Plata Valley reflect trends influenced by a gradual south and north increase in elevation that appear to indicate responses to changing climate. Such distributions provide a broad overview of previously noted settlement patterns characterized by the presence of large and evenly spaced Pueblo II and Pueblo III communities that include the Jackson Lake, Morris 39, Homes Group, and Morris 41 communities, as well as Pueblo I communities such as Morris 23 and the higher elevations north of the Colorado border. The presence of San Brito utility at 4 sites in the La Plata Valley reflect extremely rare and seldom identified transitional basket maker period components. During the La Plata Highway Project, an early pit house excavated at 37594 in the Jackson Lake locality with San Brito utility was dated to the mid AD 500s. This component was not identified until the excavation of a late Pueblo II structure it lied within. Together, survey and excavation data indicate one of the very extremely few so far identified examples of settlements dating to the earliest ceramic period documented in the northern Colorado Plateau. A relatively recent use of the term transitional basket maker implies a rarely identified phase transitional between the pre-ceramic basket maker 2 and ceramic public and basket maker 3 period that reflects the beginning of the widespread production of gray and whiteware pottery. The long sequence of production of these distinct light-colored wares reflect the use of distinct technologies and conventions resulting from the use of low iron clays weathered from shell formations from exposures scattered across the Colorado Plateau. During the La Plata Highway Project, typical basket maker 3 pit houses were also excavated at the Jackson Lake and Barker Arroyo locality that reflect occupations in this area that date shortly after the previously mentioned transitional basket maker structure. Sites from the Nusbaum survey were assigned to basket maker 3 components based on associated ceramics reflect a dramatic increase in a population that was evenly distributed along the entire length of the valley. The documented sites are reflected by distinct communities in the Jackson Lake, Barker Arroyo, Pendleton, and Morris 41 localities. Distributions associated with with Pueblo I period occupations reflect a continual increase in population and movement into communities located in higher elevations north of the Colorado border. By the early Pueblo I period, growing populations along the La Plata had concentrated into large communities, indicating ceramics indicative of Rosa phase components, resembling those defined in areas mostly to the east of the La Plata, with the largest of these represented by Morris 23. While site counts along the La Plata River seem to reflect a decline in population by the late Pueblo I or Piedra phase, communities dating to this phase are more common in locations on drainages just to the west and may indicate slight changes in organization rather than a total decrease in population. Distributions noted for many Pueblo I sites in general reflect a larger climate-related trend toward the concentration of populations into large communities located in the higher elevations along the northern edge of the Colorado Plateau, often along rivers or drainages as they come down from the southern Rocky Mountains, and includes sites investigated along the Piedra River, Alkali Ridge, as well as those identified during major investigations by the Navajo Reservoir, Animas La Plata, and Dolores archaeological projects. Almost all the public 2 sites identified from this survey are located south of the Colorado border, with many sites reflecting the reoccupation of favorable locations that were occupied during the earlier Basket Maker 3 period that are sometimes reflected by superimposed pit houses within different long occupied community complexes. Pottery styles and trade wares at early public 2 sites may indicate some influence from Chaco Canyon and other areas to the south. While the large La Plata communities were occupied over a long period, there appears to have been a dramatic rise in number of sites during the late Pueblo II period, and apparently apparent decline during the early Pueblo III, and another increase during the late Pueblo III period. By the Pueblo II period, very large and often long-lived communities were, that were often organized around great kivas along segments of agriculturally favorable areas of the San Juan, La Plata, and Animas River that also include well-known sites such as Aztec Ruin and Salmon Ruin. This area seems to reflect an important region of its own that has been described by Woki Toe and Peter McKinnon as the Tota, referring to its Navajo name of this area, meaning where rivers come together. The late Pueblo II period is represented by the highest number of sites documented for any period recorded during the Nusbaum survey, with almost all south of the Colorado border and mostly clustered in 4 large community complexes. Most of the sites recorded for the 2 southernmost communities were assigned to this period during both the Nusbaum survey and the Plata Highway Project, and are highlighted in yellow, including Barker Arroyo on top and the Jackson Lake community below. It should also be noted that there was also a very large late public occupation in the homes in Morris 41 communities um, just south of the Colorado border. The number of sites dating to the late Pueblo II period is particularly high for communities associated with the Holmes Group and Morris 41 just south of the Colorado border until the abandonment of this area in the late 1200s prior to the reoccupation of large parts of the eastern and upper San Juan by ancestral Navajo groups during the Denatah phase. Despite reaching their peak of occupation at different times, all the major communities along the La Plata seem to reflect continuous and related occupations spanning from the early Pueblo II to the late Pueblo III period. A question related to trends noted is whether the long sequence of occupation in the Plata Valley communities noted reflect a sequence of continuous development are a series of abandonments and movements or reoccupations of occupations and influences from other areas. During the La Plata project, we conducted a detailed analysis of 3,518 rim sherds assigned to different types, during which associated paint type, rim shape, and decoration, surface characterization, and design styles were recorded. The resulting data seems to indicate that from the early Pueblo II to late Pueblo III period, changes in painted whitewares was gradual and accumulative in nature, and indicating a continual related sequence of development by groups along the La Plata Valley. This contradicts some previous scenarios involving a series of abandonments and reoccupations of these communities, and indicates a stable and continual occupation from the early Pueblo II to the late Pueblo III period, with population shifts representing local reorganization and short distant movements of populations. While best documented for the late Pueblo II through Pueblo III components, this trend seems to also apply to the entire 900-year occupation of the La Plata Valley by ceramic producing groups that appears to be reflected by a long and continuous sequence of related populations along the La Plata River, with some evidence of continuing influences from populations in various surrounding areas. Thus, it should come as no surprise that observations and data from Earl Morris's original excavations, as well as subsequent studies of the La Plata Valley, still largely serve as the basis for the definition and understanding of what was originally described as the Anasazi, and now more often as the source course or heartland of the Ancestral Pueblo traditional sequence. Okay. Any questions?
I have a question of it was like just one or two slides back. It was a McElmo. That one. Yeah. Is that macaws on that? What is it, the?
You mean the
Yes, the hook.
Yeah, the hook and eye sort of.
it might be that's that a little bit later that design shows up in the Mesa Verde, which is clearly macaw and parrots. There's another one that within that same thing to the right that
Mm-hmm.
that may also be a macaw with the little eye.
Mm-hmm.
So um um and and um the the guy that I talked about in the beginning, HP Mara, um and, I noticed that he was talking about that he was taking these collections from everywhere, and one of the sort of um papers that he put together gather sort of describing from the basket maker to pottery made today, he talked about the rain bird and how through the entire sequence there seems to be um, incorporation of bird elements, although probably you don't really see anything that looks like parrots until probably the Pueblo 3. So that may be one of the earliest examples. But early on, a lot of stuff looks like stylized text to me.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Are there any surprises in the La Plata Valley. It looks like they're following nicely along with everybody else in the area, so to speak. Even though one time it said taco instead of chocolate.
Taco Kenya?
Yeah,
Like
taco
that.
Canyon. I was just wondering, I was surprised there were four Sombritos sites or.
I think the thing about the La Plata and the Tota is it's a little bit of everything. And sometimes the nice thing about the La Plata was you have this continual and unbroken sequence. And so, and some, and that sequence happens across um, the Pueblo world, at least that the part of the Pueblo world and the Colorado Plateau. And sometimes um, you get flashes of that so that um, so that when we think of the Pueblo one, we think of the Loris Project or the Animas, the Plata Project, or the Animas or the Navajo Reservoir Project. When we think of the Pueblo 2, of course, it's often Chaco Canyon. And then the Pueblo 3 is the Mesa Verde. What was so useful about looking at the La Plata sequence is we had this entire sequence that um, associated, where we looked at the host, the whole sequence. So that largely probably um, um, the late Pueblo too looks like Chaco because it's contemporaneous um, with it, and and the thing, the important thing to keep in mind is our imagination is often within the about Mesa Verde and Chaco and all these places we visit, but the La Plata Valley, so a couple of places in the Tota you can visit now, including Aztec Ruin and Salmon Ruin, but but um but you can't go to the La Plata Valley because the farmers weren't about to give back land of that quality. And that's one reason why you had so many sites to the government. So a lot of these sites are now, completely plowed over. And in fact, what Morris, in a sense, was doing salvage archaeologists because a farmer would call him and say, I'm going to plow over so and so ruin. You have, a week to excavate it if you want to know anything about it. And so the La Plata is kind of this great glimpse of all these places. But one of the reasons why we had to look at at Nusbaum's 1935 survey, a lot of it's gone now, just because it's been destroyed by agriculture and development. And in fact, if you look at Nusbaum's diary, um, diary, he talks about like some of the big P1 sites, and he say um, um, these sites are completely pristine. They've never been shoveled, and the WPA workers have just found out about them, and they're probably going to be gone in a few weeks.
Oh, geez.
Any other questions?
Oh, yeah, I was just wondering, what do you make of the shifting from organic to mineral and the overlap of that? And I don't know if that was back to organic or what, but does ascribe any importance to that? What do you think?
It's a great question. I mean, it. Um, um, I mean, they're both techniques that you can you can get away with firing at a little bit lower temperatures if you use organic paint because um, if you don't get enough temperature to fuse the iron in a since glaze paint is kind of the same thing as organic paint in that it fuses at a much lower temperature. And so that may be a part of it, but why technologically, but why there's so many shifts back and forth, I'm not sure.
Do you know, were there any glaze paints found early on in the
There was the Rosa Phase site has both organic and glazed paint on them. They're a little bit more common just to the east, along the Animas, but you'll find a little bit of glazed paint on Rosa scattered across the southwest.
reading the AI translation
Oh.
is distracting. It's
Oh.
kind of amusing sometimes.
Any other questions?
Pretty nice.
So it sounds like we don't have too many more questions, but Dean, if you can flip forward to the two pit house drawings from Wolfie Tool's 2017 report. Since we have a whole bunch of important people in the room today, I wanted to introduce them because, as you can probably imagine, these projects are massive projects. They are not just done by one person. So that one. So when OAS was contracted to do work in the La Plata Valley in the 80s, it was an insanely large team of folks. They brought in a bunch of experts. Those publications are still being worked on to this day because the reports are so large. So Melissa and Rob, sitting in the corner, these are Rob's images. He's been helping with a ton of the depictions for the La Plata Valley projects, working with a whole bunch of other folks like Wolfie Tool. And Melissa's been collating these into the reports. We just got the Jackson Lake portion of those printed. And Melissa, how many volumes was Jackson Lake?
Four? Three?
There, I think it's 3 or 4, right? Tomes, but we're talking like 1.5 inches sometimes. They have tomes. So a massive amount of work has gone into these. But that's only one part of it. Then we have to store all of these artifacts that we have pulled out, including the over 5,000 rim shards that Dean mentioned. And then we turn to Diana for that. So she is helping us with that project actively as we transfer the artifacts from our side to her side. And we're using a bunch of volunteers, some of which are in this room, to help with these projects. So I just wanted to make that kind of clear that these are massive projects worked on by a ton of different people.
While we're looking at these pit houses, one interesting thing about these basket maker sites, both the basket maker 3 as well as a transitional basket maker, which really had almost been unidentified before the project, is that a lot of them aren't even really noticeable on the site, and and most of the basket maker 3, not only are they in usually public 2 sites, but they're often located right in the middle of the Pueblo 2 structures. So they're seen, and I talked a little bit about how you had a movement of populations in different uh, elevations that seem to be reflecting changing adaptive systems to changing climate. And so what seems to be going on some of these early structures is they move north into the higher elevations, um, And so these sites are abandoned. And then they come back, and not only do they locate the sites on these smaller communities where they used to live, but right in the middle. It's an so it looks like it's intent that they're um so um so I used to get when I used to do surveys, not so much for um Office of Archaeological Studies, but for earlier and cheaper companies. Um, um, I, I would in a field survey say oh, there's multi components on this site, and they say, oh, we can't say that because that'll make the excavation too expensive. And so what the companies would do is they would dig it, and then they would say, oh, we're gonna have to raise our price. We had no idea that there was an earlier component, and which is one of the reasons I left and came to the Office of Archaeological Studies.
Not your style.
Yeah, but but so what you seem to be see is this pattern of people finding um, great locations um, for um, eh, for different situation, but then the environment changes, and certainly we live at a time where not only do we have climate change, but we have climate change on steroids. But even before the massive damage that we've done, they had a um, um, they, the climate would change enough that they had to move around and develop strategies. And so you see this sequence of sort of moving around in uh, a valley that gradually goes from higher to lower elevations is the perfect place to do this. And so within these different periods, you see both locations and adaptive systems and new ways to organize communities um, um, that are homing into changes within a very delicate environment. And it's kind of sometimes I'm kind of interested. It's interesting that it took us sort of so long to figure out what was going on, because when Deric was doing his survey, it was during the Dust Bowl, during a time where there was already mass deterioration of the environment that he was at.
If we don't have any more questions, I'm going to stop the recording.